My name is Sydney Gary. I'm the Conference and Communications Coordinator for the Natural Start Alliance. And we are so excited for today's webinar, which will be led by Dr. Rachel Larimore and Dr. Claire Warden, authors of the new book, Reimagining the Role of Teachers in Nature-Based Learning, Helping Children Be Curious, Confident, and Caring. This book was just published at the end of 2024, I believe in October, and it's an amazing resource designed for educators looking to integrate nature in their pedagogy. This webinar had pretty high registration rates, and I think that really just speaks to the point that Dr. Larimore and Dr. Warden acknowledge in their new book, which is that more and more professionals in early childhood education are looking to integrate nature into their teaching. Now, this is because of the growing body of research proving that nature-based play and education is having profound positive impacts on the whole development of young children. So that's regarding academics, that's regarding social emotional development, physical and mental health, and the list goes on. And while nature as the backdrop for effective early childhood education is getting its rightful praise, we love to see it, we are also so excited to see a new resource that spotlights and elevates the educator in the story. While nature provides those unique opportunities for whole child development, the educator is the one who facilitates those opportunities in thoughtful and intentional ways that support both the child and the environment. The Natural Start Alliance seeks to honor and uplift professionals in the field of nature-based early learning who are working tirelessly to connect more young children to the natural world through education and play. And this resource, produced by truly inspirational leaders in the field, does exactly that. It elaborates on not only the why behind nature-based educators' work, but also the how, which I know is in high demand these days. How can educators lead their young learners in and with nature more intentionally? What are the many roles and responsibilities educators should assume and embody more effectively? These are some of the questions that this new book, Reimagining the Role of Teachers, addresses. We are so thrilled to have the authors, Dr. Rachel Larimore and Dr. Claire Warden, here to talk with us today, as they have contributed so much of their experiential knowledge, their research, and resources to the field over many years. So with that being said, we will stop our share screen and pass it off to Dr. Larimore and Dr. Warden to introduce themselves and get started with their presentation.
Fabulous. Thanks, Sydney. Hi, everyone. So many familiar names in the chat. That's fun.
You know, it was lovely, Rachel. We could actually see people from Scotland, so that was really good too. I was like, whoa,
I know, I saw that. I was like,
Scotland
oh,
was
look at
there.
that.
I'm like, hello, people from Scotland. Very exciting.
I love it. Spanning multiple time zones in multiple countries and crossing oceans. I love it. All right. So we are so glad that everyone's here to talk about these many different adult roles in nature-based education. Of course, we're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to talk about a few that we think are particularly important. So just very briefly, I'll introduce myself and let Claire introduce herself, but a little bit about me. I've been in the field for more than 25 years. I'm getting really close to the 30, but I just keep saying 25 plus because that just makes me sound younger. I'm in my 20s still. About 10 of those, I was a nature preschool director and then have moved now into consulting. And some of you may be familiar with my work with Samara Early Learning, which is my company. Written a couple other books other than the one we're going to talk about today, Evaluating Natureness, which is more of a assessment for how naturey is a program, and then Preschool Beyond Walls, which is more about pedagogy. Personally, I grew up on a vegetable farm in central Illinois. I now live in Michigan, and I'm just obligated. Wait, I got to get my camera right. I'm obligated to show you my hand. Might be backwards on the camera, but I live right here in the middle of the state because our state is shaped like a mitten. So, and I always forget the UP. For any Michiganders on the call, I apologize. I don't have enough hands for all this. So that's where I am and who I am very briefly. And then Claire on the other side of the ocean.
Other side of the ocean. So thanks, Rachel. So my background, my research field really is nature pedagogy, the defining and theorization of what is a nature pedagogy. And Rachel's going to talk a bit to that around the inside, outside, beyond. I suppose the journey I've been on really was set up Mind Stretchers Academy, which is an online space for people to do some research and get together for training. And yeah, there's more than 15 books now, which there's a whole list of these things. But the two most recent is the Green Teaching, which is looking at nature pedagogy as a system towards climate change and sustainability in education. And the Learning with Nature, which really explores this idea of inside, outside, beyond, which Rachel's going to speak to in a minute. Too many years, but all happy and all full of fun, and yeah, spent working with and for children. And yes, I'm from Scotland. Yes, so it's great. I'm seeing people on the call from Scotland, so I'm really chuffed you're coming in here. That's great.
I
Super.
love it. It must be supper time over there right now. I don't know,
It is.
evening.
It
It's
is.
dark. I'm guessing it's dark outside.
It is.
Yeah. So our plan for our conversation today is, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to try to do a lot in a short amount of time. But first, we're just going to very briefly make sure we're all sort of on the same page in terms of what do we mean by nature-based pedagogy. And then we're going to talk about what we call the 3 C's. And this is kind of the subheading of or the subtitle of our new book, this helping children be curious, confident, and caring. And so we'll talk about those 3 C's. What do we mean by that? We'll briefly talk about the inside, outside, and beyond, not just as physical spaces, but as a way of relating to ourselves, each other, and the natural world. And then we'll highlight a few of the adult roles that are in the book, and dig a little deeper into those. We'll also talk a little bit about the self-awareness that we have to bring to this work in order to explore those roles and embody them in our day-to-day work. And then, of course, we'll have Q&A time, as Sydney said. So it's a lot to do in a short amount of time. So I'm going to get to it. All right. To be a little depressing to start right off the bat, but to remind ourselves of why this work matters. The fact is, young children today really do face an extreme future, and there's lots of different extremes. Climate is probably the one that is most relevant data, like we feel it most obviously in our nature-based work, because I mean, where I am right now, we're seeing extreme temps, which are sort of typical, but like Christy Merrick's on the call and it's, snowing and iguanas are falling out of trees in Florida. So that is not typical. And what we see today, or what this study from Science in 2021 found, that compared to today's 60-year-olds, a child born today will experience 7 times more extreme heat waves, twice as many droughts and wildfires, 3 times more river floods and crop failures. I mean, the fact is, climate change is here. It has been here, and the impacts are every day. I mean, all you have to do is turn on the news, and there is another story that is directly connected to climate change. Of course, that isn't the only thing that children are facing. We have conflict and extreme nationalism and racism and all sorts of challenges that also face children. And so as Claire and I were talking about this with these roles of teachers, and it's like, why does all this work matter? It's this future, it's this current reality, not even, I mean, it's what's happening right now, right? And how it's going to be in the future. And we kind of had to narrow down, like, what is it that we really want children to walk away with? And that's where we focused on these 3 C's. And the 3 C's being confidence, curiosity, and care. And we go into this in great detail in the book, but each of these have impact on not only children's individual lives and how they move through the world, but also how we move through the world with each other, right? If we're thinking about confidence, it's believing in their own abilities and strengths to create a sense of agency to influence the world around them. That is everything from in the moment in the classroom of, this is where I'd like to sit versus somewhere else, or I have ideas that I'd like to share. And then, of course, from a broader community perspective, it also relates to issues like climate and conflict and so forth. So if we're thinking about, like, what is it that we want our goals of early education to be, like, well, we want children to be confident and their abilities and their strengths. But also, we don't just want them to have this confidence without a little bit of humility mixed in. In fact, we talk about that idea of humble confidence and part of that is being curious about ourselves, being curious about other people and the world around us. And, for us, even as teachers, since we're thinking about this as from an educator role, sometimes it's even just asking like, why did they respond that way? Or what was it that made them, answer the question that way, or um, act out in that way, and that behavior. And so it's curiosity, not just about our own thinking and why did I respond that way, but also other people. And oh, that's interesting that they, have different customs and traditions. And I'm curious to learn more about that, as well as the world around them. And then the final C is care. And that's taking care, of course, of ourselves and protecting our own needs and, our own health, both physical and mental, but also others. And caring about other people, caring about people that are different than us, and caring about the natural world and the world around us. So we really saw these 3 C's as underpinning all of our work related to nature-based pedagogy. But we use this to frame the different roles that we talk about. So we talk about the roles in the book, but we also talk about how do those directly support these 3 of confidence, curiosity, and care. So if you're wondering about that subtitle, that's what that's about. So very briefly, nature-based pedagogy. You're all probably fairly familiar, right? You're here through Natural Start. I'm guessing you're pretty embedded in the nature-based world. So we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but just to remind everyone that we see this as the art of teaching with nature inside, outside, and beyond. And that beyond term is, of course, a term that Claire coined many years ago to explain the space beyond the gate. So we have the inside classroom, an indoor space, outside like a natural play area, and then the beyond is the space beyond the gate. And so the nature-based pedagogy is really a way of working with children that acknowledges that we are in relationship with a natural world. We're part of it and we're not separate from it. As humans, all too often you see this kind of lived idea that we are separate from nature, and nature pedagogy really says, no, we're part of it. And how we teach with children needs to center that idea in everything that we do. So that's high level philosophical nature pedagogy. Obviously, lots of details. We get into that. I want to come back to these 3 spaces I mentioned of the inside, outside, and beyond. Just to highlight again, the inside is the indoor space, the outside is the natural play area, and then the beyond is the world beyond the fence and natural ecosystems, or spaces that also weren't designed and developed by us as educators or the children in the classroom, where we're essentially visitors to that space. And I say that because we're going to come back to those 3 spaces in just a moment. Here's an adorable little puppy. I'm guessing when that first popped up, you had some reaction. Some of you may have gone, oh, adorable. Some of you may have a puppy at home and are potty training and go, oh, puppy, right? So hard to say, but you had some emotional reaction. And I show this to remind us all that we are emotional feeling beings first. And we, on a rare occasions, think, right? We respond, we react. That's our hindbrain, right? We have an emotional reaction. The thinking is where we have to come up here to our prefrontal cortex. And we know this, we do this with children all the time, right? It's like, okay, we have to get them out of their brainstem and up here to where we can think more rationally. And we say this because as emotional beings, we bring those emotions and feelings to our work. We bring that to the ecosystem of schools, in our classrooms and our schools. And each of us have a niche within that ecosystem, and we all play a particular role. Our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors are influencing that system every day, whether we're aware of it or not, right? We don't have to have awareness. It's happening. And we are playing different roles in those spaces. So going back to this idea of inside, outside, and beyond, we want to think about them more than just spaces, but instead a way of relating to our worlds. So the inside is our individual world, our internal world. The outside is our relationships with people and the planet. And then the beyond is our relationship with the global community and the unobservable, something bigger than ourselves, right? And ideally, just like in terms of physical space, the experiences, the understandings relate and connect, between all three of those. So what's happening in the beyond is directly impacted by what's happening inside and what's happening with our relationships with others and our outside. And so there's this connection through all of those three things. Again, ways of being and relating to the world. So what does that look like from a child's perspective, just to give you an example? And we could do this from teacher roles and leaders and all sorts of different roles. But from the child perspective, from the inside, it's their physical health, right? Their balance, their coordination. It's also their joy, their identity and self-esteem, how they see themselves, what they're curious about and interested in from, sort of their own internal interest. Then there's the outside and how they relate to others. So this is, how do I problem solve with my peers, with other adults? How do I show others compassion, empathy, and curiosity about other people, right? So there's curiosity about myself, but then there's also relating to and being curious about other people, about the world around me, right? Other like science, sense making, for example. And then it's sense making in general regarding other people and the planet, and like, why or how does that happen? And digging into that kind of relationship. And then there's the beyond. And from the beyond perspective, when we think about children, it's things like, when do they experience awe and wonder? Those moments of like, wow, I think of these as the unexplainable, like the things where you try to put words to it and it just doesn't do it justice, right? That's the awe and wonder, where it's like, oh, I want to write about it. I want to talk about it. And poets and artists have done great work, but even then it always falls short, right? If it's real awe and wonder. Thinking about surprise and this idea of connecting to something bigger than themselves. So those are the three in terms of the child perspective. Now, if we think about it from teachers, because we are moving into this role of the teachers, from the inside perspective, that might be specific to your role as teacher. What is your purpose for teaching? Why are you here? Right? How do you identify as a teacher? Like, what is your personal identity? I'm playful, I'm serious, however you describe yourself, or what is that identity? What kind of confidence do you bring to your work as a teacher? When are you confident and when are you not? What are you curious and interested in related to our profession? What brings you joy about this work? Then from the outside is, how do we relate to children, families, and coworkers, right? So our connections with children, and you all know we have different relationships with just different children. Some of that is getting curious about, why do these children trigger me and these don't? And what is that about? And that moves us again back and forth between the inside, outside, and beyond, right? Understanding my own reactions impacts how I relate to children and families. So the outside is also relationships with our teaching team and the community, more broadly, of our school, interest in other people, right? And it's also our relationship with nature and the natural world, and that personal relationship that we have there. And then from the beyond, it's very similar as with children. We have those experiences of awe and wonder. We have those moments of thinking about, how are we influencing the field? How are we having this bigger impact that's beyond sort of, that we can't see the impact, right? But those ripples that go out. So those are some of the ways that this inside, outside, beyond metaphor, if you will, plays out in our work, both related to children and ourselves as teachers. So those 3 C's and this metaphor of the inside, outside, beyond are really the foundation and the thread that connects everything in the book, and these key roles that we discuss in the book. So here's a list of the roles that we discuss. Again, there are many more than, and Claire and I debated which ones do we put in, which ones do we get rid of. We had all this, like, what's the most important, and these were the ones that really rose to the top as being sort of core to what we do. And they're not necessarily written in or listed here in order of importance, but they are, we think, written or listed rather in sort of first steps, maybe, like these are, or the places where it's easier perhaps to start engaging, like provider of space and time and materials. And then we start moving into like facilitating experiences is a little more nuanced and challenging, holding memories, building relationships and having conversations, managing and modeling risk taking in all sorts of different ways, by the way, not just physical risk, but also intellectual and emotional risk, provocateur, being a mentor, guide, and leader, and being an advocate. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all of these. We'd love to, but we don't. So we're going to highlight a few of them today. We'll talk about providing time and then facilitating experiences, holding memories, and being an advocate. So with that, let's move into the first one, provider of time. All right. Now, at first, often when people hear this, they think, oh, play, like time to play. Absolutely, right? That is part of this, is time to play. But we also want you to think about providing time for children to notice the natural world, to notice each other, to notice themselves, right? Again, we're back to this inside, outside, beyond. We want all three of those components there. Time to fail and try again. And you all have seen this for back to risky play, right? You've seen that over and over again where a child's like, oh, they want to climb up on that tree. They want to climb up on that log. And I just keep sliding off, but I'm going to try again. To keep, that requires time to keep doing that, right? To try, fail, try again, and over again. Time to build relationships. Relationships don't happen like that, right? They require long periods of time. Time to just be. And this one is so important. And I think one that we maybe take for granted that we do naturally in many programs and many nature-based programs, because we have time for children to go over and sit by a tree and just watch the world and be. But it's really valuable and important for us to be intentional about offering that time. Time to learn in and with nature. So not just physically being in it, but also to have an experience, to reflect on that, have another experience, and have this relationship with the natural world. And of course, time to be silent, to just listen to the natural world, and experience that around us. So thinking about how do we provide time in the day, here's a couple examples of how that connects back to those 3 C's. For example, time to notice. Well, if you're thinking about curiosity, right? Why does that matter for curiosity? Well, it's then now I can see and respond to things I'm interested in, things I'm fascinated by. And noticing matters for care, and seeing when I need help myself or I could help someone else, seeing the impact of my actions, right? Noticing also builds confidence in, noticing the things that I've achieved and challenges I've overcome. And we can help children to see that, to notice that, but it also requires time to do that. And then you see the examples here of just being, even with confidence, like having that time to be bored and have time to daydream and then be inspired for creative thinking. And this is one of those that I think we don't give enough credit to, that open space to just be, and how that is the time where we come up with new ideas and we connect ideas and things we've heard about. This is why a lot of you probably have your big aha moments when you're in the shower, when you're driving, when you're on a walk through the woods, right? When you are having those moments where you're just being and you're not doing, that's when we can really build that confidence, care, and curiosity. So, and then you see the other examples here, and we have all of them and this graphic within the book. I feel like I keep talking about the book, but we can't read it all to you in an hour. So, we do encourage you to check it out. So one of the features of, once again, the book is each of these roles, we talk about what it looks like, and kind of how we can embody that and how it supports the 3 C's. But then we also talk about, what does it sound like? So how do I know that we're thinking about and embodying providing time? And we break this into, what am I saying to myself? What am I saying to my co-teachers? And then also, what am I saying to children? So with ourselves and co-teachers, should we extend free play a few more minutes since they're so engaged, right? That being aware of, oh, we could allow more time in our schedule. We could adjust that, which also you'll notice as we go through these relates to other roles we talk about, because you may be saying, well, we have a printed schedule that we have to provide to regulators. And I would argue that if they're engaged in play, then we switch into another role of being an advocate, and we advocate for children by providing time, right? And saying, no, we're going to give them a little more time. Just the way these are all connected. So another example might be, wow, they're really enjoying sitting here just chatting. Like, let's not rush this. Let's let them have a little more time. And we're having that conversation as adults. But now with children, we might also ask them directly, hey, would you like to keep playing, or are you ready to go on our hike? right? That also is giving them some agency and helping to build their confidence, but also giving them a voice, and not just giving them a voice, they have a voice, right? It's whether us as adults are listening. And so that's a way that provider of time sounds with children. It looks like you're making progress on your construction project. Would you like a few more minutes to keep building? It's also giving them that choice to say, yeah, I'd like a little more time. So those are just some examples of what it might sound like related to time. And now I'm going to turn it over to Claire to talk about the other roles here. So Claire will talk about facilitator of experience.
Okay, over to me. So for me, I suppose it's always been a really significant thing that when children share with us their depth of thinking, when we're outside, that we have a system that actually allows us to embrace flexibility in terms of planning, that doesn't hold us too tightly to a set series of activities, but allows that child voice to permeate. And then by allowing that child to be a partner in the learning, so you engage in those, I suppose, pedagogical dances where sometimes the child is leading, sometimes you're leading, you develop a space of complexity. And one of the things that Rachel and I talked a lot about here was, how do we get complexity? How do we really help people to say, if you took the example of a mud kitchen, which Rachel's put on the slide here, so, all right, the first time everyone got a mud kitchen, there was great joy and everybody went to play and it was fantastic. And then now what I begin to see is mud kitchens that are sort of abandoned because they've become too chaotic. So one of the elements for me is that we started taking this concept of spirals and spirality, which is very closely linked to Bruner's work. But in this sense of spirality, we don't just do something once as the practitioner, the educator, the teacher, whatever you want to call yourself. But what we do is that we start off with that understanding of being a facilitator. So we notice, and that bit has to be the very first thing, hey? And then because you're then noticing, you then go, oh, actually, there's a real fascination with the size and depth of the containers we've put into the mud kitchen. So you might change them to put something smaller into that space to challenge the child. You notice again. So now we're on the other side of that spiral. We're doing a bit more noticing, we're doing a bit more thinking, and now they're really interested in the concept of stirring, of manipulation. And so we're making available nearby maybe extra sticks, or maybe we're thinking about spoons. So you just start to add in and make available these different things. And by doing the noticing and changing resources over multiple days, what you then actually start to get is this spirality. And when you get the spirality moving, then through the middle of there, like a giant vortex, is progression, is challenge, is higher order thinking. And if all we're doing as a facilitator of the experiences is just going in a single circle and not visualizing the spiral that moves up, then actually what we're doing is just changing resources every now and again. So when we started to do this, we hope it's clear in the book, because we spent a long time trying to work out what would be a good example. So we have put grids within the book to try and talk through these things a little bit more. So, when you're entering that idea of being a facilitator, I've worked with colleagues who've got so excited, but they've actually forgotten that there is a child within the middle of it. But, there is an important part of this where we're so excited to be doing this work. But we need to have a moment where we can step in and step back. So stepping in and stepping back are really important, I think, in being a facilitator. So I would go to Rachel and say, hey, I've noticed some children are fascinated with shelters. Anybody else seeing that happening anywhere else on the grounds? Because you need to have multiple perspectives of that one child's engagement to give you this lovely, rich understanding. And then, we're not the font of all knowledge. And I think being a facilitator means that you collaborate with your peers so that you can say, has anyone got some thoughts on how we could develop this with this particular child? So when we start to work with children, then it's about giving up some of the power. And when I talk about child rights, people say, well, it'll be chaotic. You're not saying it's a free-for-all chaotic madness. You're saying, hey, let's co-construct. Let's find out what children are wondering about. And so you're going to children and saying, oh, I heard you say that you might want to build a frog house. I wonder what you might need to be able to do that. So taking those ideas, and Annabelle's put a little question in there about how does this work with the, if you believe in inquiry-based learning, you are a facilitator of experiences. And that means that as you're sort of thinking about your space, you're allowing the natural world to do its thing, which is complexity, unpredictability. You hold that and allow the natural world to, while still then adding in these moments. Yeah. Thank you. So those people who know me will know that the whole of my life really has been talking about these things called floor books, which I'll talk about in a minute. But for me, I love the idea of holding memories. I'm a big scrapbook girl. I've got too many photographs to count. I love the idea of revisiting and thinking. And we've learnt a lot from Laura Malaguzzi in Reggio Emilia, of course. But we are based in a natural world. And so for some of us, how we go about documenting learning can't be at a table because we're in a forest. So we have to find other ways of doing it. And that means that we're getting creative about taking scrolls of fabric out, and we're using photographs respectfully, and we're using a form of journaling. But when you come to look at the supporting of those 3 C's that we mentioned earlier on, that adjusts your lens. And so that means that if you really want children to understand curiosity, they have to feel that you are also documenting that as a valuable thing. So we center it on those curiosities, those fascinations. We want it to be accessible so they can revisit those ideas. And it could be that it could be a year later. If you're working in a part of the world that's got seasonal variation, it could be that you discover something one winter, and maybe it's the next winter that that child revisits that thinking. So holding memory isn't from day to day or week to week, but it can be this lovely sense of gravitas that happens over generations. The other things on the screen are kind of just there. Working in nature time means we go in slow time. And so for us, a lot of our documentation doesn't become about a set theme like, I don't know, superheroes, but it becomes about mud, or it becomes about change. So we do an awful lot of work around concept-based inquiries. Okay.
It takes a minute to get it across the ocean, Claire, sorry.
Is it flying its way across by pigeon? So for me, floor books are really planning with and for children. And that's what you're doing, is that you're saying, okay, I mean, in its most fundamental form, here is a big piece of paper. Let's just talk. Let's write down and put down all our ideas about something that we're fascinated by. And by doing that, you increase the relevance, you do an immediacy around it. It's co-constructed because you've got adults and children working together in this lovely relationship that Rachel talked about. If you have this big book, and a floor book is exactly that, it's a big book, what I would call A2. What would you call that in America? Not A2, flip chart, a flip chart size.
Flip chart. I really like the giant art books, like
portfolios.
portfolio books.
That kind of thing. And the only reason I'm saying that is it needs to be big enough. If it's a little tiny notebook and it's on your knee, then you've got too much control. So you need to have a piece of paper that children can get around and be able to put their ideas down and mark make. And then the bit that moves it into this idea of planning and facilitating is that you're then creating what I think somebody else said on here was stepping stones. Some people call them next steps. We call them plods, and they're called plods because they're possible lines of development. They're things that may happen next, all being well. So that there's this emergent curriculum, I suppose, coming through these floor books all the time. And you've got this lovely intertwining of voices. You've got the child, the family, the teacher, everybody's coming together as this collective community. Okay. So what does it sound like? Well, you know, if you're talking to your colleagues, it's going to be a debate around, is there a place even of technology? How do we ensure that taking these pictures isn't actually taking away the very thing that we're out here to experience? I think that's an important question to have. when these children are maybe turning their back to you, or they really don't want you to be there with a screen and a photograph, then it's about the understanding of respect for that. Again, you're looking at collective perspective. So saying, all right, I've seen Fatima and she's been really careful with that worm in the digging zone. How could we use that now as a group to talk more as a whole group conversation? Yeah. So when you're working with children, the question for me is always around, are you okay if I take your picture? So we can look at it later on. So I don't think that adults should have a right to always take photos. I think being respectful of children and saying, are you okay if I do that? I also make it very clear that I'm a shopping list on a notepad. I'm actually writing down what they're thinking and saying why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I really don't want to forget the lovely words you were using, or I want to capture these interesting ideas so we might be able to talk about them when we go back inside.
Did it make it to
Okay,
you?
so I keep going, right? It's made it. So one of the things about advocacy, and it's important, I think, that we're all here, we're all on this webinar, and I think we should be saying 3 cheers for ourselves, because being an advocate means that you stood up and said that you want to support and defend children's right to the natural world. And so for us, understanding what advocacy looks like means that children have a right to play. They should have a time to play. There should be learning spaces that are beautiful, that are really centralize the rights of both the natural world and the human right. And that when we're writing these policies, that we're including children's opinions and voices within them. So this advocacy is very much positioned inside, but it also then goes outside. So within that indoor space, that's your inside environment. Outside is, who are you working with in the community? And so by looking at what the community then offers, allows us then to think about, okay, how do we expand the rights of children to engage in this natural world with us? So looking at funding, looking at green spaces. And then beyond that, okay, what can I do as a teacher? Allows me to get involved in movement, and you know, being part of your local movement, but your national and then the global movement, for me is really important. But it's got to be done in a way that is respectful, as I said, to children's rights, as well as to the rights of the adults and the planet. So what does that sound like? Well, you know, I've seen some amazing things, and one of the other papers that I've been writing a little bit about is kinship and the understanding of environmental kinship and how children have a passion and a connection to the natural world. So you might say, Jamal's got a real passion for protecting bugs. How can we help him share that with other people? How do you lift those children's voices into a place that others might hear it? One of the things I loved was I had a conversation with children about regulations and world. And sometimes we can get very demoralized, whereas often when you consult children and say, actually, the people from regulations have said you can't jump in a puddle because you might drown, which is one thing happened to me. And I put this forward to a group of 4-year-olds, and they just turned around and went, well, that's ridiculous. Why would I put my face in that puddle? And I just started writing down things that they were saying, and they made puddle measurers, and we sent it off to the regulatory bodies. And you began to see that actually some of the regulatory bodies are never held accountable by children or to children. So having those conversations with our colleagues, but also then if we go to the next bit, when you're working with children, is having those obvious things, which is, okay, Chloe, your paper needs to go in the recycling bin. You know, the sign that your friend Eliza made was obviously worked. Wasn't that a great thing that she did to help us remember that? But also then talking about, you know, offering them to join you in partnership where you're truly demonstrating what it is to be sustainable in every aspect of your work. So one of the things around this then is about, you know, this sentence really, and I'll just let you read it because you can read. I think for Rachel and I, there is called an emotional resonance. And that means that when we get together, there is often a moment whereby you don't need to say anything. You just sit next to somebody and you understand their intuitive thinking. And I think on to this unexplainable sense, if you truly believe in relationship, then it does become an intuitive element. We are, I think, doing a fantastic job in early childhood education, and we started to really enjoy ourselves at the end of the book, where we said, okay, if you could be this super duper person, what would be? And we wrote all these things. Now, yeah, I'd love to be all those things every day, but hey, let's be honest with ourselves. Some of these, they're in my heart and they'll be every day. Some of them, when I'm a bit tired, maybe I forget what I was supposed to say. So for me, these are things that have been told to me by children, but they say it in a lovely way. Like they'll say about humility, I like Mrs. Jenkins because she just listens and doesn't talk to me too much. So they want that humility from us, the space for them to think, but they also want you to be genuine. So thinking about some of these words is the invitation we gave people at the end of the book, because I think it's important that people read a book and then there are ideas within it and there are reflection points within it. But at the end, that you have that time to really consider, who are you and what traits would you want to develop? So these self-reflection questions are some of those that we put into the book. And, I think if we're going to grow as a profession, then sometimes the questions we have to ask ourselves are tough. I think sometimes we have to really look at our attitudes and our fears, not only of ourselves, but also colleagues, and then think about, okay, what did I say to that child? What was the tone I used? How did I position my body? Was I down low? Was I too dominant? Was I in a power balance with this child? And being brave enough to not only consider these as your self-reflection, but then also going out to your colleagues and saying, all right, what do you think? And could you give me a little bit of feedback? What are you feeling at the moment doing some of these things? So teaching to me is, as I've already said, that sense of relationship with yourself, being kind to yourself and being generous in your thinking. And at the beginning of this book, we did spend a lot of time debating the idea of generosity of thinking. And some of the reading we were doing around it was, that it was a generosity to others. But I think one of our important messages is about generosity to self, and not to be too critical of what you're doing, certainly in the situations that some of us are finding ourselves in. So it is a human endeavor. It's built in relationship, but the natural world can both give us elements to keep us, to nourish us in the work that we do.
Whew, we did a lot in a short amount of time.
We did.
But we have more, of course, we'd love to talk about. And so this is how you can reach us. But I think, Sydney, maybe you have questions that have come in. We have a little time for Q&A, which we did manage to leave a little time. I'm really proud of us.
Oh my gosh, there are so many questions that have come in the chat. So good. I just want to jump right in so we have some time to cover as many as we can. Somebody asked, I guess this is in regards to the 4-book, are the levels of complexity meant to be like stepping stones, that the changing of materials and adult engagement is the ultimate goal? Or are the levels of complexity simply an example of ways to find out what works best for your classroom or group of children?
I think for me, there is an increasing complexity. And I think the reason for me describing that spiral is to move the expertise within our profession from seeing a series of experiences as being flat to starting to visualize that actually we can almost go down actually in a spiral, but it's easier if I go up. So it's going up into the higher order thinking skills might require us as adults to think quite abstractly and quite intentionally, actually, about what it is that we're putting out into some of the spaces, or indeed removing. So given that the natural world is full of play affordance and that's its very complexity, then sometimes not having too many adult-made resources is actually going to develop higher order thinking skills. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Great question. Okay, next question. What recommendations do you have for getting started with teachers who may not yet be bought into the ideas of nature integrated education? What are some first steps you've taken to help transform to nature play focused?
Well, let me just from a very high level try to connect ideas here a little bit. I mean, we talked today about the inside, outside, and beyond, and really that it's about this inner work and these roles that characteristics we bring, but also roles that we play. And we have to remember that we can't actually make other people do anything, right? We can't force people to change. And so what we can do though is inspire, and we can, be an example for other people. We can support them and recognize that maybe they have hesitations, things they're nervous about, concerned about. And that goes back to those 3 C's, right? Where we can get curious. Like, I care about my coworker. I care that they are comfortable and wanting to do this work. But let me get curious about what is it that maybe is keeping them from this nature-based idea. And sometimes it's not necessarily what we think. In fact, I have a client I was talking with recently, and this teacher just was really resistant, like did not want to go outside, would not go outside. And this is an organizational goal, right? It turns out that staff member couldn't afford warm clothing to go outside in the winter temperatures. They found resources to get some clothing. Teacher came in just a couple days ago and was like, "Hey, I'm all bundled up and I'm ready to go. I'm excited about it." And this is a really long-winded answer to say there are lots of tools out there about nature-based pedagogy and how we get started. And Claire and I have written multiple books about those things. But to tie it to this as well is like, let's get curious about the internal challenges that individual teachers might have, and not just assume that we know it's because they don't like nature or they don't think this is good for kids. They may actually think it's great for kids, but I don't like being cold, or and genuinely maybe don't have great circulation or don't have clothing, or right, we don't know until we get curious about what the challenges are. But I would also just say both of our websites are packed with all sorts of resources for actually making the change to integrate nature into the classroom, and specific to nature-based pedagogy in terms of materials in those 3 spaces of the inside, outside, beyond. And often people will start inside and start working their way closer to that beyond. So I don't know, Claire, if you have other thoughts. I wanted to keep it on topic without getting too far off into the details,
I
but that's
think,
also important.
yeah, no, I think the only bit I would come in is the whole, I work a lot with First Nation communities, and I'm honored to do that. And I think one thing that I learned from being in those spaces was the sense of walking alongside. And if you're walking alongside somebody, then you have to truly know them. You come to understand the stuff that Rachel's talking about there. That actually walking alongside somebody isn't just literally physically walking alongside. It's about sharing some of those deeper fears and concerns, as Rachel's been saying there. And you need to spend time doing that. People aren't going to share that straight away. It's about developing professional trust. Mm-hmm.
I love that, turning the 3 C's also to support our staff and supporting the children in learning. So that's great. Someone asked, or requested, please address the issue of the fear early childhood teachers live with under the umbrella of licensing and health department oversight when considering children playing outdoors in nature. You touched on this a little bit in the conversation around being an advocate, but maybe either of you would like to expand a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely is a place of advocacy. And just like everything else, we have to come to that work with an attitude of curiosity and about what is it the regulators are concerned about. What are their sort of motivations for rules that don't make any sense to us? Because actually, if we find that common ground, we realize they just care about children's safety, just like we do. And often they haven't experienced the kind of risky play we're talking about, or haven't been outside regularly as part of their work in early childhood. And so it's finding that common ground of what can we agree on, and then how do we build from there. And so that is, I mean, that is advocacy day in and day out. I think it's knowing the research and the benefits of nature-based pedagogy for children's development. Being able to speak to other programs that have done this successfully, other states, if you're in the US, that have licensing regulations that support this work. So there's lots of different ways that we can be advocates, but again, it's back to that characteristic list. Sometimes takes a lot of self-regulation to stay in our prefrontal cortex and have a kind, thoughtful interaction with a regulator that you want to just go, are you nuts? Like the kids the regulators that said they couldn't have puddles in Scotland. Like, it's Scotland, first of all. How are you going to do that? And then also, like, 4-year-olds, they'll stand up. It's okay. So I don't know, Claire, if you have other thoughts on that.
No, I think we've both been around a bit. I'm not sure I should say that, but we've both been around a bit. And I think when people really started at the beginning of this movement, it was like pulling teeth, and it was incredibly slow. And I think, one of the things that's the power here is the power of the collective. And so although you feel that you are maybe alone when you're having those conversations with licensing, there are organizations like this one which you can go to then to find colleagues who've had those examples again. And I think the power of the collective is the thing to hold on to, because there's more and more of us out there now that have research and evidence and just experience, to be able to help.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Do you have any advice on helping children develop the confidence to take risks without immediately asking for adult help? What is the best way to encourage them without getting frustrated at us for not swooping in?
Okay, well, Rachel alluded to the thing about the risk aspect, and often what we do is we focus on physical risk. Whereas actually, I think we need to take a broader view of that to look at the intellectual risk-taking that happens in education at the moment. And we also need to understand the emotional risk-taking. So out of those three, physical, emotional, or intellectual, I would actually argue it's the emotional risk-taking that concerns me most, because we're now seeing children who are incredibly fearful of life, actually, for all sorts of different reasons. And people blamed it on COVID, but we can't keep doing that. Now it's become more of a dialogue about cultural shifts in terms of how parents or families are supporting risk-taking in the biggest umbrella. So the intellectual risk-taking of wondering and not having the right answer and pondering and philosophizing, all those things have become a little reductionist, which means they've just been a little bit suppressed. But in answer to the question, how do you help that child? Well, it's about the first steps. It's about something that's very small. So I was doing some work in China, and the center I was with said, oh, you can't have leaves. We can't do this. It's got to be cleaned. So I thought, okay, I'm in the middle of Beijing. So where am I going to go? So I went to a supermarket, sanitized lettuce and all sorts of different produce, and brought those, so beautifully hygienic, never really touched the soil, brought those leaves into this early years environment and started talking about the possibilities of playing with leaves. So you have to go to where people are, I think, and walk alongside them, as I've said many times. So go to where their fear is, whether it's a child or a setting or wherever that might be. And then just say, okay, let's have a look at this. It's not a spiky leaf, it's a lettuce leaf or a piece of kale or it's something easy. And then what I've found is that feedback loop just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So small, tiny steps would be my advice. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Oh my gosh, that was so wonderful. Based off of the chat, it appears everybody else was finds this information very valuable. So we really appreciate you taking the time today to share with us about your new resource. We are going to share the link to the book in the chat here. You can also find that on Samara Early Learning as well as Mind Stretchers Academy. As I said in the beginning, both this webinar recording and the relevant resources, so primarily the slides, will be shared on our website, which will be made available in the next week. We'll be sure to email you all as registrants to notify you when those materials are posted. A couple of quick announcements before we let you all go. Many of you probably already know, but for those who don't, be sure to save the date for Natural Start's 2025 Nature-Based Early Learning Conference, which is taking entirely online this summer, July 14th through the 18th. We are so excited and anticipate a fabulous lineup of sessions, workshops, featured speakers, and more. The deadline to submit a proposal is actually by the end of the day today. So if you have any ideas that you can wrap up into a proposal quickly, be sure to submit it by the end of the day. You can visit conference.naturalstart.org to do that, and we'll drop that link also in the chat. Lastly, just a quick plug for a sponsorship. If you are an individual or represent an organization or a company with an interest in nature-based early childhood education, you might consider becoming a sponsor for this year's conference. Sponsorship includes a host of benefits listed here. You can read more about those on our website. Again, we'll drop that link in the chat. That is all that we have the time for today. Again, thank you, Dr. Claire Warden and Dr. Rachel Larimore, for your time, for your knowledge, for your expertise. We appreciate you, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.